And now for some political analysis. Michael Crowley is senior foreign affairs correspondent for Politico. Shawna Thomas is the Washington bureau chief for Vice News. David Frum is a senior editor at The Atlantic, and David Nakamura covers the White House for The Washington Post. Thanks for being here on the holiday. Shawna, the president out tweeting this morning about immigration. He says no more DACA deal. What is happening?
Well, number one, there wasn't really much of a DACA deal left. I think you can see, especially from the appropriations process and the omnibus, that the Democrats didn't push it. The Republicans don't seem to have a way to get there. And also, it's in courts, basically. So I think he's pretty safe in saying there's no DACA deal because there wasn't a DACA deal. I think the other interesting thing is he said that they need to go to the nuclear option, which we have heard the president say, which is getting rid of basically the filibuster in Congress, in the Senate. And this is also something that Senator McConnell has said, I'm not for that. So I think this is stuff we've heard from the president before, and this is how he's spending his Easter.
What's interesting, too, I think, is that with no DACA deal, it wasn't just Democrats that lost something in protecting younger undocumented immigrants, these dreamers, but also the president. He only got the $1.6 billion for his border wall. He knows it. I think there's his conservative base is eager for him to get started. And as much as they pitched the idea that they're going to use that money to get started on some of the wall immediately, the president's frustrated he didn't get more of the wall. And I think now it's going to be a political issue come this fall. And I think he's sort of trying to set the groundwork that he wants to move forward as hard as he can on tougher immigration.
And David, yes. The president linked this as well to the future of the free trade deal with Mexico and Canada.
Well, the president is revealing to many of his supporters the true cost of Donald Trump's own presidency for things they believe in. What triggered the president's tweets was a comment on Fox and Friends this morning about what has been an emerging issue in the conservative press, a movement of some hundreds of people from Central America through Mexico, unchecked by Mexican authorities, hoping to get to the United States border and then to make a request for asylum. It reminds us of the rushes to the border from Central America in the summers of 2014 and 2015 that were triggered by President Obama's DACA executive orders. He made it clear that it was going to be easier to stay in the United States, and many thousands of people left Central America to try to take advantage of that. That was brought to an end with the cooperation of Mexican law enforcement. Mexico is must be a partner in defending the country against illegal immigration. If you alienate Mexico over the wall and over NAFTA, what you end up doing is electing this summer a much more nationalistic, much more radical Mexican president who will not cooperate. And these rushes to the border, which Trump is railing against, will be a cost of the Trump presidency.
And this isn't the only trade deal that the president has linked this week to other issues facing this country. The president also, Michael, threatened this free trade deal with South Korea that many in the White House thought they settled if they don't do or go along with what he's asking for with North Korea.
Yeah, he boasted that he had leverage over South Korea at this point as we head into these incredibly sensitive negotiations with North Korea. It seems like he's still on track to meet with the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, in May. But you would think that at this time, the U.S. and South Korea would be hugging each other closely, trying to have a unified strategy in front, show the North Koreans that you can't divide up America's alliances in the region, and instead Trump has chosen this opportunity to go after them economically, to renegotiate a trade agreement. Interestingly, I think that some of the concessions he's gotten from the South Koreans, I've seen compliments from unexpected quarters. He may be feeling as though that he's onto something here, and he may be feeling like he can push it farther, and that he's going to use this moment for economic gain as well as security gains. But it is very counterintuitive that you would be pressing the South Koreans at such a critical strategic moment on economic issues.
David Nakamura, the joint exercises with South Korea go underway today. They had been delayed to accommodate the Olympics. Yep. That was also a little bit of a give to North Korea as well.
But I think what this administration is trying to signal is that if Donald Trump does have some coordinated strategy, there's a lot of people who don't believe it, but that they've learned from mistakes in the past in potential negotiations with the North, and that is maybe easing up on some of the military cooperation with South Korea or the hardline sanctions that have been imposed. And this administration has gone farther on sanctions unilaterally and through the United Nations. They're pledging to keep all of these things in place throughout any negotiations until the North shows some specific examples of actually moving toward denuclearization. That's a big if and well down the line, but I think you're seeing a lot of people say we need to keep the pressure on, this maximum pressure idea, well through the negotiations.
The administration's one strategic idea is it's easier and in the short run cheaper to kick your friends than to kick your enemies. So it's easier to kick South Korea than it is to do anything about North Korea. It's easier to bully Mexico than to work on actually getting Mexican help to harden the U.S.-Mexican border. And that appeals to Trump's instincts, but to describe any of this as a strategy, I think is just a fundamental categorical error. What you have are a series of impulses that are that are driven by the search for weakness and the desire to humiliate.
But there's no, the problem is we are isolating China to a certain extent with our conversation about trade. We are, in some ways, this isolates South Korea, who we know is going to meet with the North Koreans before we meet with the North Koreans. The Chinese met with the North Koreans before we met with them. It confuses the situation a lot. But I could say that about almost everything that comes out of the Trump administration, that the rest of the world is confused.
Isolating China was strategy. That's why we had the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the effort to build Pacific arrangements that could weaken China, contain China, and enhance American strength. What you now have are, slaps at South Korea, who one of America's most important potential and maybe former friends in the region.
And also Japan.
Japan, yeah.
Right. Japan. If there's any world leader that's really tried to sort of get close to Trump, it's Prime Minister Abe in Japan.
He's coming here soon.
Yes, he's coming to try to talk about North Korea and set some guardrails because the Japanese are concerned about this negotiation. But I think that the Japanese have seen the risks of closing up too much to Trump.
On Russia, Michael, this was a pretty significant action by the White House. They said they expelled not diplomats, but Russian undeclared intelligence officers. Russia took another action in response. Were you surprised to see this kind of escalation?
I was a little surprised, particularly because it came on the heels of President Trump calling President Vladimir Putin to congratulate him on his re-election in an election process that was widely seen as anti-democratic and basically a sham. I think Freedom House described it as a sham, so did Senator John McCain. President Trump called Putin, and I think as David may have been one of the co-bylines on The Great Story, saying that Trump had ignored talking points that were handed to him saying, do not congratulate Putin. But I think what has become increasingly clear is that there is sort of a two-track American approach to Russia. There is the Trump administration, which has actually been taking some relatively tough measures. I think a step that didn't get enough attention was Trump's decision to sell anti-tank missiles to Ukraine, which was a proposal that President Barack Obama always feared would be a dangerous escalation in the conflict.
And
in
his
Ukraine.
national security team emphasizes that.
Absolutely. They were very pleased by that. But then at the same time, you have President Donald Trump himself, who continues to try to reach out to Putin, to befriend Putin. And Trump has this logic, supposedly, that says you can have a tough fist policy-wise, but extend your hand personally to try to somehow find some kind of common ground. And I think we just have to live with that reality and see where it takes us.
The Russian media reporting, and it has not been contradicted here, that while 60 individuals were expelled, that the quota of Russians who are allowed to be in the United States has not been reduced. Right. And so it is so that 60 people will go, 60 new people will come. So it's not as tough a measure at all as it looks. Russia's
cap on our diplomats was different. David, I want to ask you, this is not the first time that the president seems to be at odds with his national security team. Right. The Syria announcement, withdrawing 2,000 troops suddenly.
Right.
This caught many by
surprise, including the Pentagon, I think, and other advisors who've said that's the worst thing you can do, that you may have had some success in defeating ISIS and taking their territory, but you're setting conditions for their reemergence or reemergence of another extremist group if you leave too early. Some even point to Barack Obama having withdrawn troops from Iraq and setting a stage for ISIS to take land in that country.
That was a campaign talking point.
Yeah, it was. But Trump campaign hard against terrorism, and I think he also sees, though, the idea that our military are on endless missions around the world as a flaw of previous administrations on both sides of the aisle. So I think that hits his instinct to withdraw troops, but to do it in the way he did it at a campaign rally, get maybe applause lines without setting the stage with your national security cabinet and going against their advice does not make sense. You're right. The same way he also sort of accepted this negotiation with North Korea and a face-to-face meeting with Kim Jong-un just sort of surprised everybody in the way he came out with that. I think it's a hard way to run your national security team.
Go ahead.
Well, and I think one of the things people haven't focused on as much is that right after he said the Syria thing in Ohio, he also complained about the trillions that we've spent in the Middle East, that we could spend money more on schools here if we didn't spend those trillions in the Middle East. And it sort of had me thinking that, what does that say to our military? What does that say about what they're doing, the job that they're trying to carry out, the ability to try to get Syria back to some attempt at stability. And I was also struck because we had someone die in Syria.
Yeah.
Master Sergeant Jonathan Dunbar from Austin, Texas,
Exactly.
died of an IED on the same week that Trump is saying these things. And
and freezing funding that is used to move
exactly 200 million.
unexploded ordnance. We have to leave it there, unfortunately. So much to talk about, as always, with all of you. I'd like to thank our panel for coming in on the holiday, and we'll be back in a moment.